Michael had lived in his quiet suburban home for nearly 7 years, creating a peaceful sanctuary with his prized possession, a luxurious above-ground pool that had become the envy of the neighborhood. The day the moving truck pulled up next door, he watched from his kitchen window as Sarah Thompson emerged, designer sunglasses perched on her highlighted blonde hair, barking orders at the movers while her 3 children raced around the yard. During his welcome visit, Michael couldn't help but notice how Sarah's eyes lingered on his pool, visible through the side gate. "What a wonderful setup you have," she commented with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The kids just love swimming." The way she emphasized the word love made something twist in Michael's stomach, but he brushed it off. He was a good neighbor after all. When Sarah finally cornered him at the mailbox 2 weeks later, with "the kids are just dying to use your pool just once," Michael reluctantly agreed, establishing what he thought were ironclad rules. Weekdays between 2-4 p.m., with Sarah present and absolutely no additional guests. The following Tuesday, Michael arrived home from work early and decided to enjoy the pleasant spring afternoon by reading on his patio. At precisely 2:00 p.m., his doorbell rang. Sarah stood there with her 3 children, Aiden, Madison, and little Zach, all equipped with inflatable floaties, towels, and an oversized beach bag that seemed suspiciously full. "We're ready," she announced with an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. Michael nodded politely and led them through his house to the backyard gate, noticing how Sarah's eyes darted around his living room, assessing his furniture and decor with a barely concealed judgmental squint. Once at the pool, the children immediately cannonballed in with shrieking excitement while Sarah perched on Michael's favorite lounger, immediately pulling out her phone. "You don't mind if I take some photos for Instagram, do you?" she asked, though her finger was already tapping the screen before Michael could respond. "The lighting is just perfect here. My followers will be so jealous." Michael settled into a chair on the opposite side of the pool, attempting to return to his book, but finding it impossible to concentrate amid the chaos. He noticed with growing unease how Sarah seemed more interested in finding the perfect selfie angle than supervising Zach, who kept venturing into the deeper end of the pool. "They're having so much fun," Sarah commented after an hour, her voice carrying a hint of expectation. "It's such a shame their cousins couldn't join today. My sister's kids are visiting this weekend. They'd absolutely love this." When 4:00 p.m. arrived, Michael made a show of checking his watch. "Well, looks like our time's up for today," he said pleasantly but firmly. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Already? But the water's just perfect now. Couldn't we stay just a little longer? Michael, you're such a wonderful neighbor to share this amazing space." The kids at their previous school never had friends with pools. The calculated compliment paired with the subtle guilt trip made Michael hesitate. Against his better judgment, he acquiesced. "Just 30 more minutes," he conceded, immediately regretting his decision when he saw the triumphant gleam in Sarah's eyes. As they finally packed up at 4:45 p.m., Sarah lingered by the gate. "This was just wonderful, Michael. You know, I host a small mommy group on Thursdays. Nothing fancy, just 5 or 6 of us rotating houses each week. It would be my turn to host this Thursday," but she trailed off, glancing meaningfully at the pool. "It would really put me on the map with the neighborhood's social circle. Just a couple of hours." Michael felt cornered. "I don't think that would work with my schedule," he attempted, but Sarah was already nodding as if he'd agreed. "Perfect. We'll be so quiet you won't even know we're here. You're such a dear." With that, she herded her reluctant children out the gate, leaving Michael with a sinking feeling that somehow, despite his careful boundaries, he just lost the first battle in what would become a prolonged war. The violation of boundaries began so subtly that Michael almost doubted his own memory. Had he really sent 2:04 p.m., or had he said any time? Surely he hadn't agreed to Tuesdays and Thursdays and every other weekend. The Thompson children's voices grew increasingly familiar, their splashing and screaming becoming the soundtrack to his afternoons. Michael's attempts to reclaim his space were met with Sarah's weaponized indignation. The kids had been looking forward to this all day, she'd say, making him feel monstrous for enforcing the original agreement. One Wednesday, he arrived home early to find Sarah hosting what appeared to be a full-blown mommy group, 6 women sipping wine on his deck chairs while a dozen unfamiliar children cannonballed into his pool. When confronted, Sarah waved dismissively. "We were going to clean up. You're always at work anyway. What does it matter?" After that incident, Michael began documenting everything. The broken pool filter that mysteriously stopped working after he denied pool access for a week, the missing pool chemicals, the gate that kept accidentally being left unlocked, and most disturbingly, coming home one evening to find the Thompson children swimming unsupervised at dusk, a clear safety hazard that Sarah dismissed with "they're excellent swimmers." The final straw came during Michael's weekend business trip when his security camera notifications pinged continuously. Reviewing the footage from his hotel room, he watched in horror as Sarah hosted what could only be described as a neighborhood pool party, complete with a DJ, coolers of alcohol, and at least 20 children splashing in his pool. The night ended with the teenagers he'd never seen before skinny dipping at 2 a.m. Something in Michael snapped. He spent the weekend researching pool removal companies and property reinforcement options, a plan forming with each passing hour. Using his vacation days, Michael orchestrated a stealth operation while the Thompsons were at their lake house. The pool removal crew arrived at dawn, and by sunset, no trace of the pool remained. In its place, Michael began creating a fortress, a reinforced fence topped with decorative, but effective, spikes, state-of-the-art security cameras with motion detection, and no trespassing signs that cited specific legal codes. He splurged on an elaborate garden design, installing raised beds for vegetables, a stone patio with a fire pit, and motion-activated sprinklers around the perimeter, a detail that would prove particularly useful later. As he surveyed his transformed backyard, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in months: peace. Michael had planned the timing perfectly. His intel from neighborhood gossip confirmed the Thompsons would be at their lake house for at least 5 days, their annual family reunion trip that Sarah had been bragging about for weeks. The morning after the skinny dipping incident, Michael called in sick to work and began making calls. By noon, he had scheduled a pool removal company, contacted a fencing contractor, ordered security cameras, and consulted with a landscape designer who specialized in rapid transformations. "So you want the pool completely gone in 2 days?" The removal contractor sounded skeptical over the phone. "Cost isn't an issue," Michael replied, surprising himself with his determination. "I'll pay whatever rush fee is necessary." The contractor arrived that afternoon to assess the job. "Neighbor trouble?" he asked knowingly, noticing the trampled flower beds and discarded beer cans still floating in the pool. Michael nodded grimly. "You have no idea." "Actually, I do," the contractor chuckled. "About 30% of our rush removals are because of neighbor disputes. Last month, we removed a pool at 2 a.m. with flashlights because the owner was so desperate to have it gone before the neighbors woke up." The next morning, Michael watched from his kitchen window as a small army arrived. The pool removal crew began draining and dismantling the structure while the fencing team measured and made plans. The landscape designer walked the property with Michael, sketching ideas as they talked. "Instead of just removing the pool, we can transform this space into something that actively discourages trespassing while still being beautiful," she explained. "Defensive landscaping, it's becoming quite popular." Michael was intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" "Raised garden beds around the perimeter filled with thorny but attractive plants like roses and barberry. A central patio area with a pergola for shade. Motion-activated lighting for security that doubles as ambient evening lighting when you're entertaining. And my personal favorite," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "motion-activated sprinklers. They're marketed for deterring deer and raccoons, but they work remarkably well on unwanted human visitors too." For the first time in months, Michael laughed genuinely. "That sounds perfect." The transformation progressed with military precision. By the end of day 2, the pool was completely gone, with only a large dirt area marking where it had been. The fence crew had reinforced the existing structure and added decorative, but sharp iron spikes along the top. The security system installer mounted cameras at strategic locations, connecting them to Michael's phone with real-time alerts. The screeching tires of the Thompsons' SUV announcing their return coincided perfectly with Michael putting the finishing touches on his garden. The thermometer read 96 degrees, the hottest day of the summer so far. Michael was deadheading roses when the now familiar sound of the gate rattling echoed through the yard, followed by Sarah's eldest son's frustrated grunt. Minutes later, the doorbell rang with such persistence that it seemed the button might break. Opening the door, Michael came face to face with a red-faced Sarah, flanked by 3 sweaty children in swimsuits, pool noodles clutched in their hands like weapons. "The gate's locked," she stated, as though reporting a civic emergency. "We've been driving for hours, and the kids need to cool off." Michael stepped onto his porch, blocking the doorway. "I removed the pool," he said simply. The transformation on Sarah's face was almost theatrical. Confusion, disbelief, and then a rage so palpable it seemed to radiate heat. "You wait. You can't do that. The kids have been looking forward to this all week." Michael stood his ground as Sarah's voice escalated to a pitch that brought curious neighbors to their windows. "Actually, I can. It was my pool on my property." When Sarah demanded compensation for emotional distress and her children's ruined summer, Michael calmly suggested the community pool 3 miles away. "This is discrimination against children," Sarah hissed, yanking her kids back toward their house. "You haven't heard the last of this." Michael had been mentally preparing for this moment for days, rehearsing possible scenarios while he worked in his new garden. Still, the actual confrontation was more intense than he had anticipated. As Sarah stormed away, dragging her disappointed children behind her, he noticed several neighbors watching from their porches and windows. Mr. Jenkins from across the street gave him a subtle thumbs up before retreating inside. Michael went back to his gardening, but the peace he had enjoyed was now tainted with anxiety. He hadn't expected Sarah to demand compensation. That was a new level of entitlement. While watering his new tomato plants, he heard the unmistakable sound of Sarah's voice carrying across the fence as she made a phone call in her backyard. "You won't believe what our neighbor did, Stacy." "Yes, the one with the gorgeous pool. He removed it without telling anyone." "I know. The kids are devastated." "No. He claims it's his property so he can do whatever he wants. I'm thinking of calling the homeowners association. There must be some rule against removing neighborhood amenities without consultation." Michael shook his head in disbelief. Neighborhood amenities? His private pool? The audacity was almost impressive. Later that evening, while grilling dinner on his new patio, Michael's doorbell rang again. This time it was Sarah's husband, Tom, a man Michael had only seen in passing as he was usually away on business trips. "Hey, Michael," Tom said awkwardly, hands shoved in his pockets. "I wanted to talk about this pool situation." Michael invited him to the backyard, where Tom whistled in appreciation at the transformation. "Nice setup you've got here now," he admitted, accepting the beer Michael offered. "Look, I want to apologize for the commotion earlier. Sarah gets intense about the kids' activities." "Intense is one way to put it," Michael replied, neuter. What followed was a week of psychological warfare. The Thompson children became amateur spies and would-be infiltrators, their attempts to breach Michael's yard growing increasingly bold. His security system captured the middle child attempting to squeeze through a loose board in the fence, which Michael promptly reinforced. The eldest was recorded throwing the family's basketball repeatedly into Michael's yard, then demanding entry to retrieve it. The youngest was caught attempting to dig a hole beneath the fence, a project abandoned when the motion-activated sprinklers drenched her. When Michael compiled this footage and presented it to Sarah with a formal cease and desist letter he printed from a legal website, she exploded. "Those cameras are an invasion of privacy. How dare you film my children without consent? For all I know, you're some kind of pervert," she screamed loud enough for the entire street to hear. The next day, flyers appeared in neighbors' mailboxes warning about dangerous conditions and child endangerment at Michael's address. The campaign culminated on Saturday when Michael was hosting his sister and her husband for lunch in his new garden space. 2 police cruisers pulled into his driveway, lights flashing. From his security camera feed, Michael could see Sarah standing on her porch, arms crossed triumphantly as officers approached his door. "We've received a complaint about a hazardous condition endangering neighborhood children," the older officer explained. "There's also an allegation that you're deliberately withholding water from minors during a heat advisory." Michael invited them to inspect his property. "While you're here," he added, pulling up the security footage on his tablet, "I'd like to report multiple instances of attempted trespassing." The psychological warfare began the morning after Tom and Sarah's heated argument. Michael had hoped Tom's intervention might improve the situation, but if anything, Sarah seemed more determined than ever to make his life miserable. At 7:15 a.m., Michael's phone buzzed with a security alert. Madison, the middle Thompson child, was attempting to squeeze through a gap between fence boards that Michael hadn't noticed before. He watched on the live feed as she pushed and struggled, eventually giving up when her shoulders wouldn't fit through. By noon, all 3 children had made separate attempts to enter his yard. Aiden, the oldest, had repeatedly thrown their basketball over the fence, then rung Michael's doorbell demanding to retrieve it. After the 3rd time, Michael simply placed the ball on their doorstep without answering. 2 hours later, the ball came over again, but this time Michael kept it. Little Zach's attempt was the most industrious. Armed with a plastic beach shovel, the 6-year-old had begun digging a tunnel under the fence. Michael might have found it adorable if it weren't so invasive. He waited until the boy had created a decent-sized hole before activating the motion-sensitive sprinklers. Zach's surprised shriek as the cold water hit him was followed by the sound of Sarah's back door slamming open. "Who did that?" "Michael. I know you're in there. Did you just spray my child with water?" The officers weren't amused by Sarah's misuse of emergency services. After viewing Michael's meticulously documented timeline of pool entitlement, trespassing attempts, and property damage, they paid Sarah a visit. From his garden, Michael couldn't hear the conversation, but Sarah's animated gestures and the officers' increasingly stern postures told the story. The cherry on top came when other neighbors, apparently fed up with Sarah's entitled behavior affecting them as well, approached the officers with their own complaints. The following day, Michael received a formal apology letter, clearly written under duress, and possibly legal advice, acknowledging his property rights and promising to respect boundaries moving forward. The Thompson children were conspicuously absent from his yard thereafter, though Michael occasionally caught them staring longingly through the fence. The unexpected twist came 3 weeks later when a landscaping truck pulled into the Thompsons' driveway. Michael watched with barely concealed satisfaction as workers installed a modest above-ground pool in their yard, significantly smaller than his had been. The final victory came during the neighborhood block party that fall when several neighbors complimented Michael's garden and asked for vegetable growing tips. "Your yard is the nicest on the block now," his neighbor from across the street commented, loudly enough for Sarah to hear as she stood alone by the dessert table. "It's amazing what proper boundaries can do for a space," Michael replied, raising his lemonade in Sarah's direction with the slightest smile. She didn't attend the next neighborhood association meeting, but mysteriously, 3 new families requested permission to speak about establishing a community pool fund, proving that sometimes standing your ground doesn't just solve your problem, it creates solutions for everyone else too. Officer Rodriguez, a veteran with the local police department, approached Michael's front door with his younger partner in tow. Beth, ever the lawyer, immediately stepped forward. "Officers, I'm Beth Callahan, attorney at law. How can we help you today?" Officer Rodriguez glanced at his notes. "We received a complaint about hazardous conditions endangering neighborhood children at this address. There's also an allegation about withholding water during a heat advisory." Michael invited them into the backyard where Jim was still enjoying his lemonade. "As you can see, officers, this is my private residence. I recently converted my pool area into a garden." The younger officer looked confused. "So there's no pool?" The complainant specifically mentioned a pool. "There was a pool until 2 weeks ago," Michael explained, showing them before and after photos on his phone. "I had it professionally removed after repeated trespassing issues." Beth added, "My brother has extensive documentation of unauthorized use of his property." "Withholding water during a heat advisory?" Officer Rodriguez repeated skeptically, looking around at the lush garden with its obvious irrigation system. Michael connected his tablet to show them the security footage. "I believe this is what the complaint refers to. My neighbor's children have been attempting to enter my yard without permission since I removed the pool. This is their youngest being deterred by motion."